Hey, Brian here with DIY Outdoor Life. Today we're going to be talking about this rubber RV trim insert. This is a really important part of our camper. I'm going to show you how to replace it. We're going to learn a little bit about it. I'm going to show you how to identify when damage has occurred. But this is so fast, easy, and cheap. This might want to become part of your maintenance maybe every other year or every 3 years or so on your camper to make sure we're keeping the water out. So I noticed that some damage has occurred on this rubber insert on my Bushwhacker. It's right here on the corner, and I use this thing for some mild off-roading, and I'm sure that I'm pushing brush up against this and it's busted. I'm also going to be doing this job on a much larger camper today, and that one has more typical damage. It's long vertical slits down the middle. It almost looks like they were cut with a razor blade. And that just happens naturally from sitting out in the sun with some little vibration when you're driving down the road. So it's a good idea to inspect this and see if any damage has occurred. If there is damage, you have to replace the entire section. There is no mending it. On the Bushwhacker, it goes start to finish. On some bigger campers, this might be done in sections, and you might be able to get away with just repairing one section. So this metal corner track is very common on most campers. You're going to find this on the vast majority of campers on the market. And it is a structural component. It kind of shapes itself like an L, and when it goes on the camper, it helps hold the corners in place. There's some waterproofing there, and a lot of times it's responsible for holding the skin on the surface of the camper. This older style Bushwhacker has aluminum skin. The new ones have Phylon. It doesn't matter. It's just kind of floating and being held in on the top and bottom and around the doors. So this is a very important part of the camper. Now where this little rubber insert comes in, well, they have to drive screws very close together all along this during the build process. If they've done this properly, they've sealed every step of the way. They put some liquid sealant down, they might use butyl tape. All that sealant should be sandwiched in. I can't promise you how your camper was made, but that's how it should be done. When they're all finished, all of those screws are exposed. So that's why there's a channel there that this piece of rubber goes in. It keeps the water off of those screws and keeps it away from where it could infiltrate the camper. And it also works like a gutter. It's gonna run all of that water down where it's caught and then drop it off on the ground so it doesn't sit in place on the camper. There's a really important part here that we have to pay attention to. You would like to think that the water would run down and then just drop freely on this little backwards radius that cuts under, but that's not how water works. There's a capillary effect. So it will hug the camper and it seems like it defies gravity. It doesn't fall off, it runs all the way to the end. So these bottom corners, that's where the water's moving the fastest, and that's where there's the highest volume. This is also a really vulnerable spot of the camper and where water makes its way in and can cause a lot of damage. So we're going to want to pay close attention to these bottom corners. So the place to start here is on these end caps. They're usually just set in with one Phillips screw. Sometimes there's some sealant behind them. So we're going to back the screw out, and then we're either going to have to cut this out or pry this out with a screwdriver. It's usually not too difficult. Okay, let's keep it there. So you can see there was a whole bunch of like water and nasty stuff trapped behind this. We're going to talk about that in a second, but I'm going to put this to the side so I don't lose it. And this is where we're going to get started. This trim insert, I have the little piece right here to demonstrate, is just pinched in this side track. So it's going to peel out real easy. On this Bushwhacker, the two pieces of metal trim actually butt in the center, and they've globbed that over with some sealant. You might have to cut that away, not on the actual metal section, but just along the sides of the rubber section to be able to get this to go. I've already done that. and you peel it the rest of the way. Now, there was another cap here. I've already removed that. And now, as simple as that, our RV insert, track, molding, track insert, whatever they're calling it these days, has been removed, and now it's time to replace it. This stuff is relatively inexpensive. I buy it in really long rolls. There's some shorter roll options for you, but at this cost, this is not a bad thing to have laying around. This job is so easy that I do it while I'm camping. You know, I might as well get up one morning and spend 10, 15 minutes doing this job than setting it aside at home. I will put the exact link to this in the video description so you're getting the right stuff. They typically sell it in either 7/8 or 1 inch, and in my experience, 1 inch works for almost everything. There's very few exceptions. I use 1 inch for everything on this Bushwhacker and the other camper that I'm working on. If for some reason you're going to put this in, and when you squeeze it, there's like a huge arch and it's really steep, you might need to back off to 7/8, but I don't want you to put 7/8 in if you have the 1 inch track, because it's not gonna make a watertight seal. So the first thing that I do with this, and it's helpful if you have a second person, but I'm just gonna drape this over top of the track, roughly mock out the length, take a pair of scissors, cut it long, we'll trim it at the end. So doing this project by myself, it takes an extra minute, but basically you just kind of get the rough length. I snipped it. You could see that I'm over 12 inches long on both sides. You want to work all the corkscrews out once you've cut it. There is a right and a wrong way that this goes down. When it gets smushed together, there's two little tabs that are going to stick into the little C channels of this metal trim. That's the right way to do it. So as you arch this in together, it forms a nice dome in the middle with those two tabs. If I flip it upside down and smush it together, it actually tries to make almost like a complete circle, and it's not gonna make that watertight seal. So once I have it in place, I flip it in the proper orientation, and I'm ready to get started. So now it's time to start putting this track back in, and I'm gonna do it the way I prefer. Feel free to follow along, or I'll give you the option to put that end cap back on. I'm actually not gonna be returning that end cap. I'm gonna take some sealant. I like to use Proflex RV. That stuff is really good. It cures like a glue and a silicone, like sealant. But when it cures, it's not hard as a rock. In that case, vibration can pull it away, but it's also not super gummy like if you're using bathroom silicone. This is the proper stuff to use. But I'm gonna seal the nail hole, the screw hole, and I'm gonna take my time to kind of feather around any spots where the water can get in. When I start this, I'm gonna leave a long tail here. I'm gonna trim it a little bit, but I'm stealing this method from how Hiker Trailers has built their trailer. Even though this might not look as good right now as that end cap, it allows the water to keep going and not work its way into the camper. That corner cap traps things there, and it looks nice, but it's the last thing that I want to do on my camper. Now, part of the reason we leave this tail long is because this stuff shrinks in the sun. So after a year or two, it starts to suck itself back up the track, and you have the most vulnerable section exposed. So sometime next year during a camping trip, I'm gonna walk by with scissors and snip that off once this is shrunk up, but I'll still leave a little overhang so that water clears the corner. You'll see what I'm talking about. If you don't wanna do it this way because you like the factory way, go ahead and bring it up flush, line up your screw hole, take a screwdriver or an awl or a nail, poke a hole right where that screw hole is, and then you're gonna be returning the cap back on once we're done. So two different ways to do this. Let's get started. Now to start this, I'm gonna pinch it in. Make sure I have my orientation the right way with the side tabs. And I'm going to slip it in one side and the other. Now this first part's important because I have liquid sealant there. I don't wanna wait till tomorrow to do that, or I'm gonna have to kind of pick all that sealant out. With it going in this way, there's still room for the water to drain on both sides. I'm just covering those old screw holes, but that little bit of sealant is actually gonna hold this in place instead of driving that screw in. Now it's real easy. Pinch, 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 work your way up, and then kind of pat it in with your hand. Some spots, if they're giving you trouble, you can gently take a screwdriver, pat that in. Let's go ahead and get a close-up here. You can either push it in one side and kind of scrunch it, work it into both sides, and then just kind of seat it in, or you can pull it out, pinch, and stick it in and try to get both sides at once. You're gonna get the hang of this. This is really an easy job. Just make sure you're making a really nice seal here. Matter of a few seconds, I'm already up to the edge of the galley door. You can either climb across your camper like a gymnast here, get my mic fixed, or you can get a step ladder or something. Either way to get across the top. We're keeping the same method here. This is looking great. We're gonna be done in no time. If you come to a section where sealant got in the track, you might have to pick it out with a screwdriver or something. Most of the time you're okay. You just want it to sit down in that track. I can do this section from my feet, but do make sure you climb up and inspect and seat it down afterwards. When I'm doing this, don't stretch it. Kind of work it in and give it its slack again. I don't want to really elongate this whole rubber track. So as I'm kind of getting it in the grooves, I can push it back and forth a little bit. Just make sure we're not yanking on it while we're doing it. See these nails and screws? This one right here looks like it's broken off. So I can actually put another screw in here. I don't know where that one went, but if you were in a bind, you could just seal that hole up. So that's about the amount of excess I'm gonna leave for now. Now let me show you how I finish this job off, and we'll come back to these tabs next year. So remember when I told you they kind of globbed up and over and I cut that out? I am gonna replace that just like it was. Make sure there's no spot for water infiltration there. It does seem like it's sealed pretty well underneath, but what I'll do is I'll just kind of replace that glob. I do have black. You can do this with the clear ProFlex, but we're just gonna put a big ugly dollop here, come back down, and now you can get a rubber glove, or you're gonna have to wash your hands afterwards. You can dip it in water. You can even dip your finger in soapy water, feather that out so it looks as pretty as you want it. Truth is, nobody's gonna see it but you, and then we'll seal the ends. So we're just about done now. I'm gonna leave these tails, like I said, I'm gonna snip them after it's had time to shrink a little bit. If they drive you crazy, you could snip yours shorter than mine. They're not gonna shrink that much, but I can tell you that this does wick water better when you leave these down, if it doesn't bother your OCD. Now, using the clear ProFlex, you could use the black if you do have both. I'm just gonna put a tiny little seam on the outside. I'm not really sealing anything here. It's actually just kind of helping to hold it in place. It's like a little glue. If you were returning the end caps and you would put your hole through the rubber track here, again, I'm not a huge fan, but you could just put a little silicone or ProFlex on that cap and screw it back in now. So you could take some mineral spirits if you want to clean it up. You know, again, this is fine for me and it's gonna do a really good job. I'll do that on the other side and we're done. So folks, it took me a lot longer to film this than it actually would to do the job. I hope I gave you some good options as to why I'll leave tails for now opposed to putting the caps on. Some of the issues you might run into, like this brake, on my Bushwhacker. I've seen that on other teardrops and bigger campers as well. The link is in the description to the exact product that I use. I'll throw some ProFlex in there as well. But this job is so fast that I'll probably do the other side now, even though there's no damage, just as some preventative maintenance for next year. I really appreciate you guys watching the channel. Leave me a comment if this helped you out, and we'll see you next time. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. Sometimes you can kind of pinch it and put it in. Sometimes it goes in easier, sometimes harder. I'd like to get one side started, and then I just kind of pinch the other side in, and I can usually get this job done pretty quick. And then you go over and just run your hand and kind of spread it. This job really does not need to be one of those things that takes more time than it has to. It really is a quick fix.